Have you ever made the sign of the cross without thinking? Your hand moves, forehead, chest, shoulder, shoulder, the whole gesture over in 3 seconds, maybe less. You might say the words, "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." But are you actually there when you do it? Teresa of Ávila saw something most people never see. She saw what happens when you trace that cross with real attention, not the lazy version, not the rushed version, the version where every inch of movement carries weight. Born Teresa Sánchez de Cepeda y Ahumada on March 28, 1515, in the city of Ávila, Spain. Died October 4th, 1582. 40 years later, 1622, Pope Gregory XV made her a saint. September 27, 1970, Pope Paul VI declared her a doctor of the Church, the first woman ever given that title. She wrote about prayer like someone who had actually prayed. Not theory, experience. Her autobiography, The Life of Teresa of Jesus, written between 1562 and 1565. The Way of Perfection, written in the mid-1560s for the nuns at St. Joseph's Convent in Ávila. The Interior Castle, finished November 29, 1577. All of them filled with observations that could only come from someone who had spent decades watching what actually happens when humans try to reach God. And one thing she noticed again and again, the sign of the cross done with attention carries power most people waste. If you value documented spiritual history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Teresa's own autobiography, preserved in the critical edition by P. Silverio de Santa Teresa and The Way of Perfection, translated by E. Allison Piers from the Valladolid manuscript, dated to 1565 through 1566. These aren't devotional summaries. These are her actual words, cross-referenced with the Escorial manuscript and verified by Carmelite scholars who spent their lives studying the original documents preserved at the monastery of San Lorenzo el Real. Now back to the information. Teresa first learned the power of this gesture during her battles with the devil. Chapter 31 of her autobiography. She's in her oratory alone, praying, and something appears on her left side. She describes the shape as abominable. She looks at its mouth in particular because it speaks to her, and the mouth is horrible. A huge flame comes out of its body, perfectly bright, casting no shadow. The thing speaks. It tells her that although she escaped from its hands, it will catch her again. Terror hits her. She makes the sign of the cross as well as she can. The form vanishes. She returns to prayer. It comes back. She makes the sign of the cross again. It leaves. It comes back. She does this 3 times. 3 times the devil returns. 3 times the cross drives it away temporarily. But Teresa notices something. The devils flee from the sign of the cross, but they return immediately. They run away but come back fast. So she tries something else. Holy water. She throws holy water in the direction of the apparition. It never comes back. From long experience, she writes, there is nothing like holy water to put devils to flight and prevent them from coming back again. They flee from the cross also, but return. So holy water must have great virtue. But here's what matters for us. Teresa doesn't dismiss the sign of the cross as weak, just because the devil returns after it. She's making a different point. The cross works. It drives the enemy away. The problem is what happens after you make the sign. Do you stay in that protection? Do you mean what you traced? Or do you immediately forget what you just invoked? Teresa describes what happens to her soul when she uses holy water. A special and most distinct consolation. Almost always a certain refreshing which she cannot describe. An inward joy which comforts her whole soul. Not fancy, not something that happened once. It happened again and again. She watched it very carefully, like a person in great heat and very thirsty drinking a cup of cold water, the whole being refreshed. And she connects this to something bigger. She considers that everything ordained by the Church is very important. She has joy in reflecting that the words of the Church are so mighty that they endow water with power. Words have power, gestures have power, but only when they're done with attention. Move to the way of perfection. Chapter 26. Teresa is teaching her nuns how to begin prayer. She lays out the first steps, the examination of conscience, confession of sin, and the signing of yourself with the cross. She doesn't say rush through it. She doesn't say get it over with. She lists it as one of the essential first acts of prayer. Right alongside examining your conscience and confessing your sins. That's the company the sign of the cross keeps in her instructions. It's not decoration, it's structure. When you're about to pray, she tells her daughters, you must look for a companion. And who could be a better companion than the very master who taught the prayer you're about to say? But before you find that companion, before you enter into conversation with Christ, you sign yourself with the cross. You mark yourself. You declare whose you are. Teresa understood that prayer is not just talking to God. It's positioning yourself in the right place to talk to God. And that positioning begins with the cross, traced on your body, declaring that you belong to the crucified one. She experienced this herself throughout her life. In different circumstances, at different spiritual heights, the cross remained constant. On the night of All Souls, Teresa is in an oratory. She has said one nocturne. Now she's saying very devotional prayers at the end of the breviary. Satan puts himself on the book before her to prevent her from finishing her prayer. She makes the sign of the cross. He goes away. She returns to prayer. He comes back. She makes the sign again. This happens, she believes, 3 times. She cannot finish the prayer without throwing holy water at him. But notice the pattern. First response, the cross. Second response, the cross. The holy water comes after. Why does Teresa keep going back to the sign of the cross, even when she knows holy water works better? Because the cross is what you have with you always. Your hand, your body, the gesture that costs nothing but attention. She's training herself, training her nuns, training anyone who reads her books. When trouble comes, your first weapon is the cross traced with intention. And she saw what that cross could do when traced correctly. When she made the sign of the cross as well as she could, the form vanished. As well as she could, not perfectly, not with theatrical slowness, but with real effort, with attention to what she was doing, with awareness that this gesture meant something. The problem most people have, Teresa understood, is that they do this gesture without being present for it. The hand moves, the words might even come out, but the person making the sign is somewhere else, thinking about dinner, worried about work, already mentally 3 prayers ahead. Teresa herself struggled with distraction in prayer for years. She writes about it openly in her autobiography. For more than 14 years, she could not meditate without a book. Her mind wandered constantly. She would start praying, and immediately her thoughts would scatter in every direction. So she knew what it meant to try to pay attention and fail. But she also knew that the solution wasn't to give up. The solution was to keep trying, to keep bringing the mind back, to keep making even the smallest gestures with as much attention as you could manage in that moment. Because here's what Teresa discovered. God doesn't wait for you to be perfect at paying attention. He works with whatever attention you can give, but you have to give something. You can't just go through the motions and expect the motions to carry power on their own. The sign of the cross, traced with real attention, becomes a door. You're not just making a gesture. You're declaring allegiance. You're calling on the Trinity. You're marking yourself with the instrument of salvation. You're saying, I belong to the crucified one. I'm under his protection. I'm in his camp. And the devils know what that means. They understand what that cross represents. They fled from it when Christ died on it. They still flee from it when it's invoked with faith. Teresa saw this again and again. The devils respect that sign. They have to. It's the sign of their defeat. But humans forget. We trace it while thinking about something else. We rush through it to get to the real prayer. We treat it like the opening credits of a movie we've seen 100 times. Skip it. Fast forward. Get to the good part. Teresa is saying, this is the good part. This is where you're setting the stage for everything that follows. If you rush through this, if you do it without thinking, you're starting your prayer already distracted, already halfway gone, already giving the enemy an opening. Think about what you're actually doing when you make this sign. You're touching your forehead, the place of your thoughts, your mind. You're asking the Father to consecrate your thinking, to take control of the mental chatter, to sanctify the space where all your worries and plans and memories swirl around. Then your chest, your heart, the place of your emotions, your desires, your loves. You're asking the Son to purify what you want, to reorder your affections, to make you want what he wants. Then your shoulders, left and right, the place of your strength, your work, your actions. You're asking the Spirit to guide what you do, to take your efforts, to make even your physical movements serve the kingdom. Trinity, body, mind, heart, strength, all of it marked, all of it claimed, all of it offered. When you do this with attention, something happens. Teresa experienced it. The saints experienced it. People who actually pray experience it. The gesture becomes a weapon, a shield, a door, a key. But when you do it without thinking, it's just hand movements, just words. The form is there, but the power isn't. And the difference between the two is entirely about attention. Now you might ask, didn't Teresa say the devils flee from the cross but come back? Doesn't that mean the sign of the cross doesn't work? No, it means the sign of the cross works exactly as it's supposed to. It drives the enemy away in that moment. But if you immediately go back to being distracted, if you immediately stop paying attention to what you just invoked, then yes, the enemy will return. Because you've opened the door again. You've stopped standing in the protection you just claimed. This is why Teresa emphasizes that the cross is just the beginning. You make the sign to start prayer, but then you have to actually pray. You have to maintain that attention. You have to keep yourself in the presence you just invoked. The cross gets you in the door, but you have to stay in the room. And she knew this was hard. She spent decades learning how to stay in that room, but she also knew it was possible. She taught her nuns specific methods, ways to keep the mind focused, ways to bring attention back when it wandered, ways to make even vocal prayer become mental prayer through the simple act of paying attention to the words you're saying. One method she recommended: when you're praying the Our Father, say it so slowly that you actually think about what each phrase means, not rushing to finish, not trying to get through it as fast as possible, but dwelling on each word, each request, each acknowledgement. The same principle applies to the sign of the cross. Don't rush it. Feel your hand move. Be aware of where you're touching. Think about what you're invoking. In the name of the Father, pause, actually invoke the Father. And of the Son, pause, actually invoke the Son. And of the Holy Spirit, pause, actually invoke the Spirit. This takes maybe 3 extra seconds, maybe 5. But those seconds transform the gesture from automatic motion into conscious invocation, from habit into prayer, from empty form into powerful reality. Teresa wasn't writing these observations as someone who had figured out prayer easily. She was writing as someone who had struggled. She describes herself as wicked, as a sinner, as undeserving. She spent years in lukewarm prayer, years distracted, years going through the motions. She knows what it's like to try to pray while your mind is everywhere else. But she also experienced what happened when she finally learned to be present, when she learned to make even small gestures with real attention, when she stopped treating the forms of prayer as obstacles to get past and started treating them as doorways to walk through. And the sign of the cross was one of those doorways. Small, simple, it takes 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds set the tone for everything that follows. They declare your intention. They invoke protection. They mark you as belonging to Christ. They create the sacred space you're about to enter. Do it carelessly and you miss all of that. Do it with attention and you step into something real. Here's what we know from Teresa's life. She died October 4th, 1582. Some sources say October 15th, due to the calendar change from Julian to Gregorian that happened the night she died. Spain made that switch between October 4th and 15th. Either way, she died in the autumn, at Alba de Tormes, miles from Ávila, miles from the convents she had founded. But before she died, she left behind detailed instructions, methods, observations, all of them based on experience, all of them tested through decades of actual practice. In one of those instructions, make the sign of the cross with attention. She didn't say make it elaborately. She didn't say add extra gestures. She didn't say turn it into a performance. She said make it as well as you can. Put effort into it. Be present for it. Mean what you're doing. Because the power isn't in the complexity. The power is in the attention. The power is in actually invoking what you're claiming to invoke. The power is in believing that this gesture matters. The devils believe it matters. Teresa saw that. They fled from the cross when she made it. They respected what it represented. They understood its power. The only beings who don't respect it are the ones making it without thinking. The humans who've turned a weapon into a formality, a shield into decoration, an invocation into autopilot. And maybe that's why the devils come back so easily now, not because the cross has lost power, but because the people making the sign have stopped paying attention to what they're doing. They're tracing a cross while thinking about lunch, invoking the Trinity while mentally composing their grocery list, asking for protection while not even noticing they've asked. Teresa saw through this. She knew that forms without attention are shells without substance. She knew that going through the motions is worse than doing nothing because it creates the illusion that you've prayed when you haven't. It puts you to sleep spiritually. It makes you think you've done something when all you've done is move your hand and mouth without engaging your will. But she also knew the solution was simple. Not easy, but simple. Pay attention, be present, make the small gestures with as much awareness as you can manage. And when you fail, when your mind wanders, when you catch yourself going through the motions again, just start over, make the sign again, this time with attention. Because that's what saints do. They don't pray perfectly, they pray persistently. They fail and start again. They get distracted and bring their attention back. They fall into autopilot and wake themselves up, over and over, for years, for decades, until the habit of attention becomes as automatic as the habit of distraction once was. Teresa of Ávila founded 17 convents. She traveled across Spain on horrible roads in terrible conditions. She dealt with opposition from church authorities, from her own order, from suspicious inquisitors. She was called a restless, disobedient gadabout. She was accused of teaching like a professor when she should have stayed silent. She faced investigation, she faced resistance, She faced active persecution, but she kept going. She kept founding convents. She kept teaching her nuns. She kept writing down what she had learned, because she knew something most people don't know. Prayer isn't about feelings. It's not about perfect concentration. It's not about mystical experiences. It's about showing up day after day, making the gestures with as much attention as you have that day, starting with the cross and meaning it. And what Teresa teaches about the sign of the cross applies to everything in prayer. Be present. Pay attention. Don't rush. Don't perform. Don't pretend. Just be as genuinely there as you can be in that moment. And if that moment only lasts 3 seconds before your mind wanders, then get 3 seconds. Then bring it back and get 3 more. Then 3 more after that. This is how attention grows, not through grand gestures, through small ones done with real presence. The sign of the cross traced while actually thinking about the Trinity you're invoking. The first words of prayer said while actually aware you're speaking to someone. The time spent kneeling actually used for prayer instead of daydreaming with your eyes closed. Small things done with attention. Repeated until they become the structure of a life oriented toward God. Teresa knew this because she lived it. She started as someone who couldn't pray without a book to keep her focused. She ended as a mystic, experiencing the highest levels of union with God. But she never forgot what it was like to struggle with distraction. She never lost empathy for beginners. She never pretended prayer was easy. But she also never pretended prayer was impossible. She never told people they couldn't learn to pay attention. She never said the forms don't matter. She said the forms matter enormously, but only when you're present for them, only when you're actually engaging with what they represent. The sign of the cross works, but only when you make it work, by being there when you make it, by knowing what you're doing, by meaning what you're invoking. Do that, and you'll understand what Teresa understood. This gesture is a weapon. Use it like one. Make it with intention. Make it with awareness. Make it like your protection depends on it. Because according to Teresa of Ávila, who fought devils for decades and learned what actually works, it does. Here's what the archaeological record shows. The convent of Saint Joseph in Ávila still stands. Founded August 24, 1562. 13 nuns at the start, including Teresa. The building designed to be poor. Small rooms, simple construction, stone walls, the chapel where Teresa prayed preserved, the room where she wrote parts of the Way of Perfection still there. You can visit it, you can stand where she stood, you can see the simplicity she insisted on. No grand architecture, no elaborate decoration, just space for prayer, space for silence, space for being present with God. And in that space, she taught her nuns to begin every prayer session the same way. Examination of conscience, confession of sin, the sign of the cross, in that order. Every time. Creating the habit, building the structure, making the small gestures with attention until those gestures became the doorway to everything else. Her feast day is October 15th. She's the patron saint of headache sufferers. Her symbols include a heart, an arrow, and a book. The heart pierced by divine love. The arrow representing the wound of love she experienced in mystical rapture. The book representing her writings. 3 symbols for 3 aspects of one life completely oriented toward God. And somewhere in the middle of all of that mysticism, all of that divine union, all of those extraordinary experiences, Teresa never forgot the ordinary things. The sign of the cross, holy water, simple prayers said with attention, the building blocks that made everything else possible, because that's how spiritual life actually works. Not through dramatic leaps, through consistent small steps, not through perfect concentration, through persistent return to attention when attention fails, not through extraordinary experiences, through ordinary practices done with extraordinary faithfulness. Teresa of Ávila knew this. She lived it. She taught it. And she left behind detailed instructions so others could learn it too. Make the sign of the cross with attention. Use holy water with awareness. Say your prayers while actually present for them. Start small. Start simple. Start with what you have. But start. And keep starting. Every time you fail, every time you get distracted, every time you catch yourself going through the motions, just make the sign again, this time with attention. In the name of the Father, be there for it. And of the Son, be there for it. And of the Holy Spirit, be there for it. 3 seconds, maybe 5. But those seconds marked with attention carry the power of the cross itself. Teresa saw it, the saints saw it, the devils know it. The only ones who don't know it are the ones too busy rushing through the gesture to notice what they're doing. Consider what Teresa herself tells us about her spiritual development. She entered the Carmelite monastery at Ávila, the monastery of the Incarnation, November 2nd, 1535. She was 20 years old. She made her profession November 3rd, 1537. And then for nearly 20 years, she struggled. Not the struggle you'd imagine from someone destined to become a doctor of the church. Not heroic battles with extraordinary temptations, just the quiet, grinding difficulty of trying to pray when your mind doesn't cooperate, of trying to be present when presence feels impossible, of trying to maintain attention when everything in you wants to drift away. She stopped praying entirely for a period. Years. She convinced herself that it was more humble not to pray than to pray badly, that God would prefer her silence to her distracted, lukewarm attempts at conversation. The devil, she later realized, was teaching her this under the pretext of humility. Looking back, she writes that she makes the sign of the cross with amazement when she thinks about that period. The danger wasn't obvious at the time, but it nearly destroyed her. What brought her back? Not a single dramatic moment, a series of small ones. A vision of Christ scourged at the pillar that broke her heart. Conversations with better confessors who understood prayer, reading Augustine's confessions and recognizing herself in his struggles. Slowly, painfully, she learned to return to prayer. And when she returned, she brought with her all the hard-won knowledge of what makes prayer work and what makes it fail. And one of the things she learned, the small gestures matter more than the grand ones. The sign of the cross, done with attention, matters more than elaborate penances done without it. The simple prayer said with presence matters more than hours spent in distracted meditation. This wasn't just theory. Teresa tested it, she lived it, she taught it to her nuns and watched them grow through practicing it. And she wrote it down in language so clear that anyone could understand it. Not theological abstractions, concrete instructions. Do this, don't do that. Start here. When you fail, start again here. Think about her instructions for the prayer of recollection in chapter 26 of The Way of Perfection. She tells her nuns to begin by thinking about who they're about to talk to, not abstract theology about the nature of God. Simple awareness. You're about to converse with the King of heaven, the creator of everything, the one who holds your life in his hands. Picture him, she says. Picture him near you, looking at you, aware of you, actually present. Don't imagine him far away in some distant heaven. He's right here, in your heart, in this room, in this moment. The Lord of all creation has come to spend time with you. Now act like it. And before you even begin that exercise, before you try to picture Christ present with you, before you attempt any kind of focused prayer at all, what does she say? Examine your conscience, confess your sin, make the sign of the cross. Those 3 steps create the foundation. You can't pray well if you're clinging to sin. You can't be present to God if you're hiding part of yourself. And you can't enter sacred space without marking yourself as belonging to the sacred one. The examination comes first, quick, honest. What have you done today that you shouldn't have done? What have you failed to do that you should have done? Don't dwell on it. Don't spiral into guilt. Just notice it, acknowledge it, see yourself clearly. Then confess it. Not formal sacramental confession, though that has its place. Just the acknowledgement before God. I've fallen short. I've failed. I need your mercy. Forgive me. Simple, direct, true. And then the sign of the cross. The physical marking that says, I'm coming to you through the cross. I'm approaching you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. I'm not trying to make myself worthy. I'm claiming the worthiness Christ won for me. I'm marking myself with his sign. I'm declaring I belong to him. Do these 3 things with attention, and you've already prayed. You've already encountered God. You've already positioned yourself in the right place for everything else to follow. The rest of prayer can flow naturally because you've created the structure that allows it to flow. But skip these steps, rush through them, do them without thinking. And you start prayer already scattered, already distracted, already halfway out the door even though you're trying to come in. Teresa knew this from experience. She had spent years trying to pray without proper structure, years hoping that if she just spent enough time in the chapel, somehow prayer would happen. Years frustrated by her inability to concentrate, years believing she was uniquely bad at prayer, uniquely unspiritual, uniquely incapable. And what she finally discovered, she wasn't uniquely anything. She was just doing it wrong, not because she lacked devotion, not because God was far from her, but because she was trying to run before she could walk, trying to achieve mystical union before she had mastered simple presence, trying to experience God spectacularly before she had learned to be with God ordinarily. The sign of the cross was part of learning to walk, part of mastering the basics, part of building the foundation that could support everything else. Simple, small, but essential. And here's what Teresa discovered about these simple, small things. When you do them consistently with attention, they compound. 3 seconds of real presence today, 3 seconds tomorrow, 3 seconds the day after. Over weeks, over months, over years, those seconds add up. They train your attention. They build your capacity. They create pathways in your soul that make presence easier, distraction less automatic, prayer more natural. But you have to start. You have to actually do the small things. You can't just read about them. You can't just agree they're important. You have to make the sign of the cross today, tomorrow, next week, every time with as much attention as you can bring to it, every time meaning what you're doing, every time actually invoking what you're claiming to invoke. This is how spiritual life grows, not through dramatic conversion experiences, though those happen, not through extraordinary mystical graces, though God gives those when he wills, but through small, consistent practices done with increasing attention over long stretches of time. Teresa founded her first Reformed convent, St. Joseph's in Ávila, on August 24, 1562. She was 47 years old. From there, she would go on to found 16 more convents across Spain, Medina del Campo in August 1567, Malagon in April 1568, Valladolid in August 1568, Toledo in May 1569, Pastrana in June 1569, Salamanca in November 1570, Alba de Tormes in January 1571, Segovia in March 1574, Beas in February 1575, Seville in June 1575, Caravaca in January 1576, Villanueva de la Jara in February 1580, Palencia in December 1580, Soria in June 1581, Granada in January 1582, Burgos in April 1582, 17 foundations in 20 years, while writing her major works. While dealing with opposition from the Chalced Carmelites who opposed her reforms, while navigating the suspicions of the Inquisition, while suffering from various illnesses, while traveling across Spain in wagons on terrible roads in all kinds of weather, and through all of that activity, all of that external work, she never lost sight of the interior foundation. Prayer came first, presence came first. The simple practices done with attention came first, everything else built on that. She writes about this in the book of her foundations. When she's establishing a new convent, when she's dealing with hostile bishops or lack of money or nuns who don't understand the reform, she always returns to the same principle. If the prayer life is solid, everything else will work out. If the nuns maintain their interior life, if they practice the presence of God, if they keep their small gestures attentive and their hearts focused, then the external challenges will be manageable. But if the interior life collapses, if prayer becomes routine and attention becomes optional, then no amount of external success will matter. The convent might prosper financially, it might gain respect in the community. It might appear successful by every worldly measure, but it will have failed in its essential purpose, creating space for souls to encounter God. And that encounter begins, Teresa insisted, with simple things done well. The sign of the cross, the examination of conscience. The Our Father prayed slowly enough to think about what you're saying. Silence kept attentively. Community life lived with real charity. Penances done with discretion. All of it building on the foundation of presence. Teresa was 52 when she wrote The Way of Perfection. She had been a nun for 30 years. She had spent decades learning to pray. She had experienced mystical graces most people never experience. She had visions of Christ. She had locutions. She had what she describes as spiritual marriage, the highest form of union with God possible in this life. And yet, when she writes instructions for beginners, when she tells her nuns how to start praying, she doesn't begin with mysticism. She begins with the basics. Examine your conscience. Confess your sin. Make the sign of the cross. Say the Our Father slowly. Be present for what you're doing. Start small. Start simple. Start where you are. Because Teresa knew something crucial. You can't skip steps in the spiritual life. You can't jump from being a distracted beginner to being a contemplative mystic. There's a path. It's a real path. It has real stages. And you have to walk it. You can't fly over it. You can't wish yourself to the end. You have to take the first step, then the second step, then the third. And the first step, literally the first gesture of prayer Teresa teaches, is the sign of the cross. Done with attention, done with awareness. Done with the understanding that this small gesture carries weight. Now consider what she says about the devils and holy water. The devils flee from the sign of the cross, but return. They flee from holy water and don't return. Why the difference? Teresa doesn't spell it out explicitly, but the implication is clear. Holy water carries the words and blessing of the church. It's been consecrated. It's been set apart. It carries grace by virtue of what it is, not by virtue of how attentively you use it. Yes, you should use it with reverence. Yes, Teresa herself felt profound consolation every time she used it. But the power is in the thing itself. The sign of the cross is different. The power is in the thing itself, yes. The gesture carries grace, but it also requires something from you. It requires that you be present, that you mean what you're doing, that you actually invoke what you're claiming to invoke. If you do it carelessly, if you do it without thinking, then you've made the gesture, but you haven't activated the reality. You've drawn the sign, but you haven't claimed the protection. And that's why the devils come back. not because the cross lacks power, but because you left the door open by failing to mean what you were doing. You invoked protection and then immediately forgot you invoked it. You marked yourself as belonging to Christ and then immediately started acting like you belonged to yourself. You claimed the power of the cross and then immediately went back to being careless. The devils are smarter than that. They see the inconsistency. They see the gap between what you're claiming and how you're acting, and they exploit it. They return. They test whether you actually meant what you signed, and too often they find that you didn't. This is why Teresa kept making the sign of the cross, even when she knew holy water worked better against demonic attacks. Because the cross teaches you something holy. Water doesn't. It teaches you that your attention matters. Your intention matters. Your presence matters. You can't just go through the motions and expect God to do all the work. You have to show up. You have to be there. You have to participate in your own salvation. And learning that lesson is more important than winning any particular battle with the devil. Because once you learn it, once you understand that presence and attention and intention matter, then you start applying it to everything. Not just the sign of the cross. Every prayer, every gesture, every moment of the day, you start living more consciously, more deliberately, more present. Not because you've achieved some advanced spiritual state, but because you've mastered the basics. You've learned to make small gestures with attention. And that attention has started to spread to everything else. Teresa saw this transformation in herself and in her nuns. She saw women who started out scattered and distracted gradually become focused and present, not overnight. Not through any single dramatic experience, but through months and years of consistent practice, through making the sign of the cross with attention, through saying prayers slowly, through keeping silence deliberately, through doing small things well. And those small things done well eventually opened doors to extraordinary graces. Not because the women earned those graces, not because they were particularly holy or particularly gifted, but because they had built the foundation that allowed them to receive what God wanted to give. They had cleared the space, they had prepared the ground, they had learned to be present, and God could work with presence. He could do nothing with distraction. This is Teresa's genius as a teacher. She never lost sight of where people actually are. She never forgot what it's like to struggle. She never pretended that spiritual life is easy or natural or automatic, but she also never gave up on people. She never said anyone was incapable. She never treated the spiritual life as only for the specially gifted. She said, you can do this. You can learn to pray. You can learn to be present. You can learn to make even the smallest gesture carry weight. Start with the sign of the cross. Do it with attention. Mean what you're doing. And see where that takes you. For some, it would take them to quiet, hidden lives of deep prayer. For others, it would take them to active service in the world. For still others, it would take them through darkness and trial and purification. God leads different souls, different ways, but all of them start in the same place. All of them begin with the same small gesture. All of them learn to make the sign with attention. Yeah, that's the message Teresa left for anyone who would read her works. You don't need to be extraordinary. You don't need to wait for dramatic graces. You don't need to postpone prayer until you feel more spiritual or more worthy or more capable. You need to start where you are, with what you have, making the small gestures as well as you can, and trusting that God will build on that foundation. The sign of the cross traced with attention today, tomorrow, the day after, building the habit, training the soul, creating the capacity for presence that makes everything else possible. That's how saints are made, not through heroic leaps, through faithful steps, one cross at a time, one prayer at a time, one moment of attention at a time. Teresa of Ávila proved it. She lived it. And she left behind the instructions, so anyone who wants to follow can do the same. Make the sign, mean it, be there for it. Let those 3 seconds of attention become the foundation of a life lived consciously in the presence of God. It's not complicated, it's not easy, but it's simple. And simplicity, Teresa knew, is where power lives. Not in elaborate techniques, not in mystical formulas. In simple presence, simple attention. Simple faithfulness to small things done with great love. The sign of the cross, in the name of the Father, be there. And of the Son, be there. And of the Holy Spirit, be there. 3 seconds that change everything, if you let them.